No, to the highest order, one of the greatest inequalities man can inflict on man is the deprivation of material wealth. Listen, in our society, is very useful.
This is Vaush. He's a popular leftist YouTuber. He's a part of what's considered BreadTube, I guess. Vaush is an interesting character because he has done deep analysis on Nazis with his or Nazi symbolism with his Honkler video or Clown World video. He has also done very deep analysis of the incel community. So when he started talking about black nationalism, it perked my interest because I thought, oh, he was going to talk about some real interesting shit about reparations and all of that shit. He never even gets to that point. What he does is he cherry picks all the negative bullshit and dismisses everything else. Which is, I get it to a certain degree. But if you want to understand what's happening in the black community, you have to engage with all of it. And there's a reason why black nationalism has a strong foothold in the community. And I think we need to kind of deal with this. So first, I'm going to get into the reparations deal that Vaush talks about. And then I'm going to talk about, I guess, black nationalism.
Is it class reductionist to advocate for class issues which overlap with solving race issues on the premise it's more electorally viable? No, not at all. In fact, I've said this before. Reparations probably shouldn't be money just given to black folk. I think reparations should just be the government setting aside a ton of money to reinvest in neighborhoods below like a specific threshold of like economic development. That way we avoid a fuck ton of blowback and we simultaneously essentially address the same issue.
So we have to be really clear here. Let's really deconstruct it. So to avoid pissing off the anti-black racists, what we're going to do is convince everyone that reparations is not actually compensation for slavery, black code laws, redlining, segregation, all that shit. It's not actually compensation for that. What it is investments in communities. We're going to use a bait and switch, and this is going to be a compromise. And as we all know, in compromises, there are people who lose out in a certain way. So who exactly is losing out? This is not something that is actually a grand repair of some great disadvantage that was done to a certain group. This is something that should be considered the basic, essential things that the government gives to its American citizens by investing in their communities. So black people are going to lose out in this deal. That's what he's doing. He's just rebranding. He's taking something that we actually are expecting to be something that is life-changing, and it's just going to be incremental change that really doesn't amount to much in most black people's lives. So I want to be clear in trying to understand what exactly he thinks this is solving. Is this solving the economic harms of slavery? Is this solving the economic harms of redlining, segregation? What exactly do you think you're solving here? If you're solving for general poverty, that is a great thing. I am totally with you. We should definitely have a government that is trying to tackle that issue, but that is not solving the problems of black people. That is not changing the racial wealth gap. That is largely avoiding the issue.
I mean, we could get black folk to, money to black folk who are like rocking six-figure incomes in like downtown or whatever, and they still, I mean, we could, and it's not like wrong to do that, but it probably wouldn't be the best use of available resources,
So not the best use of resources, huh? Did they tell that shit to the Japanese, the Native Americans, the Italians, or the slave owners that received reparations from the American government? No, it only seems like you get this real paternal instinct when dealing with black folks. Shit gets real tricky with the money when we start talking about compensating black folks for oppression. Anyways, we got to be real here, because when we listen to these leftists talk, it sounds so good because the way they talk about oppression sounds so familiar. You think they fully understand the concept, and then you listen to them say some shit like this where they're completely sacrificing justice for you, and there's not even a second thought about what they're doing.
So here's my claim. When I say class reductionist, what I'm usually referring to is people who believe, or people who downplay or obfuscate the importance of social progress in favor of class-oriented progress, strictly along an economic line. Usually this is a Marxist bent. It's not just income inequality, it's relationship to the means of production. Now, and I want to be perfectly clear from the beginning, class and relationship to the means of production is really important when it comes to determining the level of privilege a person has in a society. That's unique to our society today, right now. For example, in 1930s Germany, it does not matter how much money you have. The ultimate superseding determiner of whether or not you are integrated fully into society is race. Race and religion, or ethnicity, I guess. Not wealth. You could be the wealthiest Jew in the world in 1934 Germany, but it would not save you from what's coming for you. Here in America, you can be a minority of any kind. Being wealthy will almost always save your ass. I would take the life of a hyper-wealthy Jewish, trans, black, whatever person over the life of like a cis straight white male who's very poor. I think that generally speaking, wealth and class override a lot of other privileges and lack thereof. But that claim is not the same as the claim that fixing class issues will automatically fix all social issues, or what's more, and this is the much stupider one, the claim that social issues are a distraction from class issues. It's really funny when I talk to lefties who make the same arguments as Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro said, well, actually, if you look at this data, this isn't evidence that black people are discriminated against. This is evidence that poor people are discriminated against. And then I talk to lefties, and they're like, well, if we solved poverty, then we can... No! That's not what the data says! You bring a black and a poor and a black rich man to court, they're both going to get proportionally higher sentences. It's not just class, it's race too. But the implication here is still kind of weird. Like the idea that like you're not marginalized if you're like a generally wealthy group. Gay people on average are wealthier than straight people for a complicated set of reasons. Jews are on average wealthier than Gentiles here in America. But that obviously doesn't track onto an accurate map of oppression, does it?
So you saw him clown the concept of well-to-do black people receiving reparations, but then you get to this point and you see he's sharp enough to understand that wealth will improve the quality of life for most black Americans, but at the same time, wealth has not shielded black Americans from oppression. So it gets real interesting when you hear them go through these type of calculations in their mind, but at the same time treat reparations with such an unseriousness that it's infuriating.
Althazar with the $10. Did you see Asheville, North Carolina passed reparations? Yeah, I did see that. The unanimously passed resolution does not mandate direct payments. Instead, it will make investments in areas where black residents face disparities. Fucking based! That is how it is done, folks. Let me tell you this. You know what would happen if we did direct payment reparations? We give like $2,000 to every black son of a bitch in the country.
Vaush is a person that claims to base his political opinions on data and research from experts, yet this is a political opinion that can't be based on anything. are you really trying to say the idea is that we would be paying compensation for slavery, segregation, redlining, all this shit, right? And it would amount to $2,000? Like, are you serious? Are you even thinking about this in any serious way? Have you done any research?
And you know what? Since a lot of them are poor, that instantly just goes into their rent. We look 5 years in the future, and all the white supremacists are like, well, we did renovations, and they still seem to be poorer than white people.
Are you actually thinking about what you're saying? Renovations are not cash payments. Renovations are actually in line with this idea of community investments. You are actually mocking the very idea that you're proposing. So yes, white supremacists will come back in 5 years and realize this hasn't amounted to shit, and they can say that they did reparations. And the funniest part about all this is that black people will be gentrified out of these communities that have been invested in. Young leftists will move in. And then you will be playing a weird game where you're trying to call us black supremacists because we're complaining about the bullshit that was pulled with reparations.
I guess maybe there's an underlying cause to their, perpetual poverty. No, investment in their communities is the means by which we actually address this problem.
Again, there seems to be a great deal of confusion about what exactly is the problem. Vaush doesn't seem to have data. He hasn't consulted the information from experts. So let's go ahead and look at what an expert has to say about all of this. What exactly is the problem?
Yeah, I want to emphasize that that the case that we build in From Here to Equality is not restricted to so-called slavery reparations in the first place.
Yes.
Our premise is that there's a series of atrocities that have been inflicted on Black Americans that have affected their economic status. So we begin with slavery, but then we move into the post-slavery era, where the first atrocity is the failure to provide the formerly enslaved with any form of restitution. They were promised 40-acre land grants. Those were never given. There was a process that was undertaken at the beginning of January 1865, where some of the folks who had been formerly enslaved and who had emancipated themselves and joined the Union Army were given plots of land. About 40,000 persons were settled on 400,000 acres of land. But that was temporary. Because Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor, reversed this process of the provision of restitution in the form of land and restored the land that had been given out at that point to the former slaveholders. Initially, Sherman's Special Order Number 15 designated approximately 5.3 million acres of land for the formerly enslaved. And if 40 acres had been delivered to all of the formerly enslaved in the same proportions as the initial allotment, it would have amounted to 40 million acres of land. Interestingly enough, at the same time that the formerly enslaved were denied any form of restitution, the United States government used the Homestead Act of 1862 to provide 160-acre grants of land to white Americans in the Western territories that had been appropriated from the Native American population. These 160-acre land grants, I guess, amounted to approximately 280 million acres of land in total.
87 million.
And I think you were saying the other day that this would constitute the equivalent of the land area of California and Texas combined.
Wow.
The locations land grant was
Trina Williams.
Trina Williams has estimated that anywhere from 45 to 90 million living white Americans are beneficiaries of the intergenerational effects of those land grants. So this is literally a national handout to white Americans of the ultimate sort. So that's one atrocity that occurs in the post-slavery period. The second atrocity, of course, has to be the wave of massacres that decimated Black communities that had developed some measure of prosperity. And not only did it result in lives lost, but it resulted in the destruction of Black property or the seizure of Black property by whites. And then we also have the lynching trail,
yes,
which was also frequently associated with the taking of property from the individuals who were murdered. And now we come into the 20th century, where the focus of wealth accumulation centers on home equity and home buying. And we find that there's a series of policies that get implemented that favor whites and disadvantage Blacks, as usual. The first set of policies are associated with the existence of restrictive covenants. Then, when the Supreme Court finally dictates that restrictive covenants are no longer legal, the process of redlining kicks in. And in the aftermath of World War II, when the United States adopts the GI Bill on behalf of returning veterans, it's adopted in such a way that that it's discriminatory in its application. It's set up so that local governments, particularly throughout the South, had complete discretion over whom would receive the benefits of the GI Bill. And so in the extreme, I think in the state of Mississippi, 2 Black returning veterans received any kinds of benefits from the home buying provisions.
And that was out of thousands, correct, Dr. Darity?
That was out of thousands,
wow.
yeah. And so you could extrapolate that to the rest of the southern states, where the proportions were extremely low, and they were very low in northern states like New York and New Jersey as well, in terms of the provisions for black veterans.
Yeah, so, speaking of New York and New Jersey, just quickly, I recently read that returning veterans built approximately 60,000 or so homes based on GI benefits that they received, and of those, less than 100 were ADOS or descendants of persons enslaved here in the U.S. Have you heard that same statistic?
Yes, yeah. And you can find this detailed in Ira Katznelson's book.
Yes. When
Affirmative Action Was White.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
But we've been arguing that in the aftermath of this, that slavery itself was white affirmative action, and that in the aftermath of the Civil War, the provision of these 160-acre land grants to large numbers of whites is white affirmative action. So Katznelson is focused on the 20th century and the way in which whites had benefited from government largesse in the context of home buying. But the process of white affirmative action has a much longer history in the United States. Absolutely. So then what we argue is that these public policies have resulted in this immense racial wealth gap of a magnitude where 13% of Blacks are members of the U.S. population, but Blacks only hold about 2.6% of the nation's wealth. And I think this is a statistic that I first heard about from Antonio Moore, and went back and investigated, and it's exactly accurate.
Absolutely.
And what it means is that the average Black household in the United States has $800,000 less in net worth than the average white household. And so I'd like to share something a bit more here that's related to that observation.
Please.
From Here to Equality, we say that you have to eliminate the racial wealth gap as a central objective of a reparations plan, a reparations plan for Black American descendants of U.S. slavery specifically. And so we say in a report that we just did for the Roosevelt Institute, to eliminate the racial wealth gap in its entirety, it is essential that the mean gap be erased rather than setting a far less ambitious goal, such as closing the gap at the Black-white median differential. Although the usual discussion of wealth gaps focuses on median differences, because the median captures the typical condition for American households, targeting the median will leave the racial wealth gap largely untouched. The fact that 97% of white wealth is held by households with a net worth above the white median, $171,000, makes any policy that seeks to close the racial gap at the median a policy that discounts overwhelmingly the largest proportion of racial wealth inequality. And indeed, this is reinforced by the fact that while 25% of white households have a net worth in excess of $1 million, it is only 4% of Black households in the United States. And so to close that gap would require an allocation of funds that would at least amount to 10 to 12 trillion dollars. And that's what we think should be one of the central objectives of a Black Reparations project.
Absolutely.
Dr. William Darity is an MIT graduate, economist, and a professor at Duke University. He is an expert on this topic of reparations. He wrote a book with his wife, Kristen Mullen, in regards to the topic of reparations called From Here to Equality. What you see across your screen right now are his reactions to North Carolina's decision. Obviously, being a professor at Duke University, he is also a resident of North Carolina, and you can clearly see that he disapproves of this use of the term reparations. So I think you kind of get the idea of where I'm going with the reparations topic, but how does this tie in to Black nationalism? What exactly is Black nationalism? You'll hear some vague discussions about how it's about being self-sufficient, Black politics, Black economics, building a Black nation. But where exactly does this idea come from? Where does this sentiment come from in the Black community? To understand that, I'm going to let Kristen Mullen kind of explain what happened at the end of the Civil War.
So we actually know a great deal about what the formerly enslaved wanted from the federal government, right? In January 1865, before the Civil War ended, General William Sherman and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton traveled to Savannah, Georgia, to meet with 20 Black ministers to ask that very thing. You know, what do the freedmen want? The group asked Reverend Garrison Frazier of North Carolina to represent them. And I'm going to read from Here to Equality. This is page 157. The leaders selected former slave and Granville County, North Carolina native Reverend Garrison Frazier. He's 67 years old, minister for 35 years, to be their spokesperson. He had managed to purchase his and his wife's freedom 8 years earlier with $1,000 in silver and gold. When asked to define the institution of slavery and state his understanding of the Emancipation Proclamation that President Lincoln had issued January 1st, 1863, Reverend Frazier replied, "Slavery is receiving by irresistible power the work of another man and not by his consent. The freedom, as I understand it, promised by the proclamation is taking us from under the yoke of bondage and placing us where we could reap the fruit of our own labor, take care of ourselves, and assist the government in maintaining our freedom." When asked how the freedmen proposed to provide a livelihood for themselves, Reverend Frazier responded, "The way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land and turn it and till it by our own labor, that is, by the labor of the women and children and old men, and we can soon maintain ourselves and have something to spare. And to assist the government, the young men would enlist in the service of the government and serve in such manner as they may be wanted. We want to be placed on land until we are able to buy it and make it our own." So when asked if he preferred to live among whites or solely among Blacks, Reverend Frazier indicated that while he could not speak for the other ministers, he preferred to live among Blacks. Quote, "For there is a prejudice against us in the South that will take years to get over." So it's interesting that he was thinking, we need land. He wasn't talking about, other kinds of assets. He knew that this was an essential asset that the Blacks would need in order to get themselves settled, established, and to begin this new life as freed people. So soon after the meeting with these ministers, General Sherman's Special Field Orders number 15 was disseminated. And this is a directive that authorized the redistribution of the balance of land confiscated from and abandoned by the fleeing Confederates who'd raised arms against the North.
This was not considered unreasonable. The American government was complying, and you had radical Republicans like Thaddeus Stevens on the floor of Congress arguing that confiscated Confederate land should be given to the formerly enslaved. That was the leftist position at the time. Well, earlier you listened to Dr. William Darity explained how the American government reneged on this deal. The left kind of abandoned black people. And what was started was a long tradition of the left sacrificing black people when it's politically expedient. There's also been a long tradition within the black community of quote unquote troublemakers making this argument for land and resources. You're not going to convince black people that the person making that demand is the bad guy if you have no other alternative to what they're saying. So, if you're saying something like this,
no, to the highest order, one of the greatest inequalities man can inflict on man is the deprivation of material wealth. It should, listen, in our society, is very useful.
Reparations probably shouldn't be money just given to black folk. Money just given to black folk.
While the big bad boogeyman of black nationalism is saying this.
If I may respond, the Kerner Commission, established by President Johnson in 1967, said that there were two societies, one black, one white, one rich, one poor. And the Kerner Commission gave specific recommendations that had to be followed if America believed in integration. 20 years after that, a group of scientists got together to see what the progress was. And the progress is that we have a larger middle class, but the masses of black people have gone backward. And the country is not only separate and unequal, but in worse condition today than it was then. So I don't think, Mr. Donahue, you should put it on me that I've given up. America has never believed in integration. Never. Never.
Mr. Farrakhan, I can't really stand up and jump up and down and say, shame on you for this feeling. I truly can't. The evidence is overwhelming. Overwhelming. 1 in 4 black males either in jail or under the tutelage of the prison system. And so I'm here to say that it hurts me to think about this, but I think I have a responsibility to understand how a lot of smart people would get to this place. America is not interested in integration. If that's the case, why are you even bothering to suggest that you're interested in it? Why not make your statement more in fact and without qualification? And if America has not been interested in integration, I assume you feel it never will be, certainly not in your lifetime. So why don't you proceed then from that point of view and tailor your speeches accordingly?
It's deeper than that, Mr. Donahue. We have a stake here. We have helped to build this country. When the Civil War broke out, supposedly, Mr. Lincoln wanted to free the slaves, but according to his own words, he really didn't care whether America had slaves or not. He really wanted to save the Union. Black soldiers fought on the side of the North and the South. The Union was saved, but we were not.
Yeah.
We have done what every citizen should do, but we have gotten nothing from it. So America is in trouble. And we believe we have a solution to the problem. And if the solution is good for black people, it's good for America.
Yeah. With time fleeting, what is the solution?
If we are already separate but unequal, and there is not the will on the part of the United States government, nor is there a national will to reconcile the differences between black and white.
If you don't believe there is.
No, I don't.
All right. Well,
I really don't.
Okay, let's not qualify it then.
But when I say if, I'm speaking now for those who might think there is that possibility.
Well, why mollify them? Why patronize them? Why accommodate them if that's not what you feel?
I don't wish for them at this point to feel that their thinking is discredited. But if in the course of this discourse and in the face of the overwhelming evidence that America really doesn't want black people, then look, let's tally up what is owed to us. Let's sit down and talk about a just solution, and I tell you, like Moses said to Pharaoh, let us go and do something for ourselves.
Okay, so let me understand this now. We're going to come up with several billion, I assume, huh?
I don't think this is the appropriate forum.
Well, no, I'm just trying to. I don't either, but I'm just trying to find out. Reparations not unlike, but certainly more substantial than those that were voted for the Japanese who were interned in World War II. Money which incidentally has yet to be forthcoming to them. Approved but not expended. Okay, I get that. Now, where are you going? Are you going then back to the homeland? Are you going back to the African continent? Is that your idea?
You know, again, all of these black people here have a stake here. We have a stake here, I think, that is more valid than those who just came here a few days, a few years ago. These are the children of those who built this. So, yes, we can go there or we can stay here. If we stay here, then why not separate and give to the children of those who built this country land and reparations that we may go and do something for ourselves.
The appeal of black nationalism is so obvious, it's so clear-cut, and so self-explanatory. It is only through the delusions of a racist American society that we pretend to not understand the core tenet of black nationalism. The left needs to really explain where it plans to go with black people.
The issue of reparations has finally penetrated national discourse. What I want to really do, Michael, is I think the most important thing is for us to define what reparations means, materially speaking, because everyone kind of seems to impose their own view of reparations for purposes of political expediency. You know, there's some candidates who they say they support it, and maybe they do, but it's meager. Maybe they don't actually support it if you read a little bit closer between the lines. Well, we live in a capitalist system. In a capitalist system, wealth directly translates into power. By 2050, what's going to happen if we do not change income inequality and the disparities in wealth between whites and blacks?
Yeah, well, 2053, we're facing Black Americans will be at zero wealth.
From what I've seen, the Humanist Report is one of the few leftist outlets that has taken this issue seriously. They have my respect for that, but I have to look at the grander scheme of things and see that really we don't have much support on the left. So, where exactly are black people supposed to go? If progressives aren't even to the left of Ronald Reagan when it comes to racial injustice, what exactly are black people supposed to do?
Hello, you all. Hi.
Thank you all very much. The members of Congress and distinguished guests, my fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong. More than 40 years ago, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the United States were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in makeshift internment camps. This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race, for these 120,000 were Americans of Japanese descent. Yes, the nation was then at war, struggling for its survival, and it's not for us today to pass judgment upon those who may have made mistakes while engaged in that great struggle. Yet we must recognize that the internment of Japanese Americans was just that, a mistake. For throughout the war, Japanese Americans in the tens of thousands remained utterly loyal to the United States. Indeed, scores of Japanese Americans volunteered for our armed forces, many stepping forward in the internment camps themselves. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up entirely of Japanese Americans, served with immense distinction to defend this nation, their nation. Yet back at home, the soldiers' families were being denied the very freedom for which so many of the soldiers themselves were laying down their lives. Congressman Norman Mineta, with us today, was 10 years old when his family was interned. In the congressman's words, "My own family was sent first to Santa Anita Racetrack. We showered in the horse paddocks. Some families lived in converted stables, others in hastily thrown together barracks. We were then moved to Hart Mountain, Wyoming, where our entire family lived in one small room of a rude tar paper barrack. Like so many tens of thousands of others, the members of the Mineta family lived in those conditions not for a matter of weeks or months, but for 3 long years. The legislation that I am about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 survivors, surviving Japanese Americans, of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law. I'd like to note that the bill I'm about to sign also provides funds for members of the Aleut community who were evacuated from the Aleutian and Pribilof Islands after a Japanese attack in 1942. This action was taken for the Aleut's own protection, but property was lost or damaged that has never been replaced. And now in closing, I wonder whether you'd permit me one personal reminiscence, one prompted by an old newspaper report sent to me by Rose Ochi, a former internee. The clipping comes from the Pacific Citizen and is dated December 1945. Arriving by plane from Washington, the article begins, General Joseph W. Stilwell pinned the Distinguished Service Cross on Mary Masuda in a simple ceremony on the porch of her small frame shack near Talbot, Orange County. She was one of the first Americans of Japanese ancestry to return from relocation centers to California's farmlands. Vinegar Joe Stilwell was there that day to honor Kazuo Masuda, Mary's brother. You see, while Mary and her parents were in an internment camp, Kazuo served as staff sergeant to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. In one action, Kazuo ordered his men back and advanced through heavy fire, hauling a mortar. For 12 hours, he engaged in a single-handed barrage of Nazi positions. Several weeks later, at Casino, Kazuo staged another lone advance. This time, it cost him his life. The newspaper clipping notes that her 2 surviving brothers were with Mary and her parents on the little porch that morning. These 2 brothers, like the heroic Kazuo, had served in the United States Army. After General Stilwell made the award, the motion picture actress Louise Albritton, a Texas girl, told how a Texas battalion had been saved by the 442nd. Other show business personalities paid tribute. Robert Young, Will Rogers Jr., and one young actor said, "Blood that has soaked into the sands of a beach is all of one color. America stands unique in the world, the only country not founded on race, but on a way on an ideal. Not in spite of, but because of our polyglot background, we have had all the strength in the world. That is the American way. The name of that young, I hope I pronounced this right, was Ronald Reagan. And yes, the ideal of liberty and justice for all, that is still the American way. Thank you and God bless you, and now let me sign H.R. 442, so fittingly named in honor of the 442nd.